there has been a recent development in the alleged massacre at Bluff Creek which has warranted an update. And while this update will no doubt remind us once again of the total investigative ineptness of those individuals who first made the allegations of a cover-up of a 1967 slaughtering of Sasquatch in Bluff Creek, this update will also afford those wrongly accused by zealots a chance to set the record straight through this further presentation of the facts. On December 28 of 2011, Thomas Steenberg came across a recent post on the BFF website that was made by an individual posting under the username Sailorman. Thomas had recalled that this particular individual had posted years ago in Iong before the creation of the massacre allegations, that he had flown the plane that took Green, DeHinden, Moffat and the tracking dog White Lady to Northern California in late August of 1967. Thomas immediately sent out a private message to Sailorman asking if he could speak with him, in which Sailorman soon responded favorably with the contact information that Thomas had requested. Since that time, both Thomas and myself have spoken to Sailorman. The following is information about the Blue Creek mountain trip of 1967 that we obtained through calls made to Sailorman. His actual name was Keith Chaiza. One of the first questions that I asked Keith was why he had not spoken up about the massacre allegations until now. And his answer was that he simply had not been to any Sasquatch-related websites for a very long time. In fact, it was not the article that I originally had written on the massacre at Bluff Creek that Keith had come across, but rather a thread about Grendel Films promoting a DVD based on the massacre with claims made by MK Davis. It was at that moment that Keith first became aware that he was being referred to as Bob Titmus, and that he was said to be present at a slaughtering involving a family of subhumans. Keith said that he was aghast to read the allegations that had been made about the group that he accompanied to Northern California. He went on to say that he was not only astounded that someone had used his image seen on the BCM film while referring to it as being of Bob Titmus, but he was equally disturbed that someone would then go as far as to alter his image so to lay claim that the tracking dog White Lady had attacked him. Keith added that the tracking dog was quite friendly, and that he had petted her throughout the trip. There have been several considerations put on the table as to how Bob Titmus first came to be targeted by Davis, and then by his few supporters. The first consideration that came to mind was the most obvious one: the lack of evidence of Davis showing that responsible investigational techniques on his part were implemented. We touched on several of MK Davis' shortcomings in our original article on the massacre story. For instance, Davis didn't seem to have ever asked what the history was pertaining to the film that he was given, which then in turn allowed him to think the film was of Patterson's original role. Such a simple basic question would have wied to him, knowing from the onset that the film in question was a compilation of films created for educational purposes and speaking engagements. In looking back, one must wonder if Davis just saw a man with a hairline like that of Bob Titmus and did not care to look any further for other relevant details. It was certainly known that Bob Titmus and John Green knew each other at the time, but should it be enough to level a conspiracy allegation at someone for participating in the cover-up MK Davis BCM print of a slaughter of what Davis believed to be subhumans? Seemingly, one of the obvious factors should have been to determine if McKay's man on the BCM film was within a reasonable height range to Titmus so to consider him even being a possible candidate. Had Davis had sought such information, then he would have known that Bob Titmus stood 5 feet 5 tall. The man in the BCM film that Davis believed was Titmus looks to be around 3 inches or so shorter than John Green, who stood 6 feet 3. The picture above is taken from a Davis illustration showing John Green on the left and the alleged Titmus on the right, as seen on the BCM film. The difference in these two men's height appears to be only inches apart. Had the man been the 5'5" Bob Titmus, then the 6'3" Green would have towered over him when seen so close together. Chiaz stands 5 feet tall in bare feet. One would think that another obvious factor that stands out would be to know what Titmus looked like around the time of the California trip. In 1967, Bob Titmus was 48 years of age. The above photo was taken of Titmus in the spring of 1963. 4 years before the Patterson film was shot. Titmus had deep frown lines, thin lips, a wide jaw, and gray hair, and certainly looked far older than the man in the BCM film that Davis and his supporters claimed to be Titmus. At the time of the Blue Creek mountain trip in August of 1967, the pilot was 24 years of age. He had no frown lines. He had full lips, a narrow jaw, and showed no signs of gray hair. The pictures above is a small compilation of images of Keith Chiazari from the BCM film and BCM still images alike. The face of Bob Titmus, taken from a 1963 photograph, is shown once again for comparison. The images in this insert are all that of the 24-year-old Blue Creek Mountain pilot, Keith Chiazin J. Below is a 1966 photograph of Keith in front of the plane that he would fly John Green, Renee DeHinden, Dale Moffat, and White Lady to Northern California 1 year later. Bob Titmus in 1963. During my initial conversation with Keith, L asked him about the flight log that would show documentation of his trip. Keith not only confirmed that he had kept such a log in 1967, but also that he still had it in his possession. Keith went on to say that after he had left Green in California and had flown the rest of the original party back to Chilliwack, BC, where he had been interviewed about the trip by the Chilliwack Progress newspaper. Myself, Thomas Steenherg, and colleague Barry Bryant recently took a trip to the archives of the Chilliwack newspaper, and we able.to locate the interview that Keith had given a reporter upon his return. During my interview with Keith, I discovered a couple of points that L found interesting. At the time that Keith was hired to fly the Green Party to California, he had no particular interest in the Sasquatch. That when Keith left Orleans and returned to Canada with DeHinden, Moffat, and White Lady, it was the last time he ever had contact with John Green and the members of his party, and while Keith had been a part of Sasquatch history by being one of those who saw the 81 Blue Creek Mountain footprints up close and personal, his attentions were soon back to being focused on his occupation as a pilot. For me personally, it was quite interesting to hear some of the details involving the BCM trip of 1967 being filled in by someone who would be considered to most as an outsider to the Bigfoot Sasquatch field. The recollections and descriptions of the trip were quite compelling, coming from someone who didn't appear to have any bias towards the existence of the Sasquatch one way or another. Thomas Steenberg and I thanked Keith for allowing us to share his information with the Sasquatch community despite a recent bad taste of what it's like dealing with seemingly rabid fanatics who plague this field. The following is what Keith had shared with me about his concerns after having tried to notify John Johnson, a Davis Massacre story supporter, of the facts. Quote, "I realize that I should not have contacted John Johnson now after receiving his reply. These people are true zealots in my opinion. I have never dealt with such people before. I tried in my email to give him the facts about the trip to California in 1967, but he seems to refuse to even look at the photographic evidence that so clearly is in front of him. T have not wanted to divulge my name, which one's so unique, as I am frightened of attracting some nutter out there. Trolling the internet. More to my horror, I found my photo's use in Titmus's obituary apparently authenticated by his wife. Is she a blind person? Here is an excerpt from the email that Johnson of Grendel Films sent to Keith. Quote, "Nice try, Keith, but the cat is out of the bag. The IP address of this has been traced. I will offer John a chance, one chance only, to go on camera to put this thing to rest, once and for all. Accept it or reject it. It does not matter to me. I am not in this for the money. There is no money in it. I am interested in the truth. This is a chance to clear your conscience, John, or to provide the answers everyone are seeking. LT is up to you. L feel no personal enmity towards you, Keith, or John, but the recent searches on a friend's site says that you, John, are worried about something. If you agree to meet with me for an interview, I will come to your location with an assistant and show you every common professional courtesy that you deserve. Reject me and a movie will be made using the evidence I have, because it is all have. One has to wonder why, if as these supporters of the massacre are really sincere, and did not have other ulterior motives for having done what can only be seen as a very poor investigation of the evidence, therefore making very serious allegations of murder. Why all the obvious untruths about having had ex-reppers validate their findings? Or in the case with Johnson, trying to intimidate someone into believing they have had their IP address traced? A response came from Bobby Short when I pointed out to her in a private message that the clearer BCM photo over the poor quality film print that Davis used of the pilot at the BCM trackway was obviously not Titmus. Short then arrogantly replied that her forensic expert, also unnamed, had said the two individuals between the film and the still picture was not the same person. That position of Short's and her unnamed forensic expert quickly changed to the two images, both the still photo and film, are now being seen as the same person, while alleging that the still picture was also of Bob Titmus 10 ye.rs before. The BCM film was shot, I was left to ponder that there either never was a forensic expert who ever studied these images, or that both the alleged expert and Bobby A. Short failed to see the obvious thing, such as both images showing the same road, the same debris along the road, the same trackway, and the same clothing showing the same wrinkles on each. The motives of these accusers, along with their unnamed experts who somehow managed to make all the same unlikely mistakes independent of one another, will be left up to future researchers to decide if they carried out a fair, responsible, and ethical investigation before making the serious allegation of murder. How ironic that in the end it was not what was done, but rather what was not done that proved to be the lesson here. Davis wrote this about Bruce Bonney in a piece he titled An Important Paper. Bruce Bonney reveals the true quality of the Patterson-Gimlin film, and for the first time, someone with photographic expertise examines the film from a technical standpoint. It is in 3 parts, with some commentary by me. Davis goes on to write, quote, "I recommend that you save this historic paper for your own records." Unquote. When talking about the unreliability in using multi-generational films to do interpretations with, Davis quoted Bonney, quote, "When analyzing fine detail in the film, it is absolutely vital to work with the original film or with a copy produced directly from the original film, because the image of the creature loses sharpness and clarity every time a copy is made." Unquote. It's been said that the difference between a fool and a smart person is that the fool will never know that he or she is wrong. As of today, January 26 of 2012, Bigfoot Encounters still displays images of Keith Chiazari in the Bob Titmus eulogy misrepresenting him as Titmus. Someone also appears to have sought to bolster their position by way of presenting a less than clear BCM still to the aging ex-wife of Bob Titmus and asking her if the man could be her ex-husband. One must ask why they never bothered to show the ex-wife the clearer picture that they allege to be Titmus, as well. As far as M.K. Davis goes, I asked Ron Roseman, a friendly acquaintance to Davis, to ask him why he had never bothered to go see the superior first-generation film print of Green's, or the .in camera original in the possession of Eric DeHinden. The answer that Davis was said to have given was, quote, "I was never invited to go see it," unquote. Again, it appeared that Davis just wasn't all that serious about knowing the truth.